So tonight's program, the Worcester Chamber Music Society has been having different members do these talks for whoever shows up. And so I decided to do my talk on an aspect of my career which is not always as visible as a classical violinist, having studied at the Oberlin Conservatory. I went down a certain route. But from the time I was a child, when I was about 13, I was always interested in different styles of folk music. I began by entering a fiddle contest when I was like 12. I couldn't believe that kids could entered the thing, and I got my bluegrass book, and I ended up coming in third place, and I have the ribbon still. And for some reason, from then on in, I was kind of hooked. In addition to playing my classical repertoire, I was always working on some kind of folk style. So tonight's one is going to cover American folk music, moving on to Irish folk music, then to Greek folk music, and then to klezmer, which is Eastern European Jewish folk music, all of which I have at different times studied or played professionally with. And I think we should just jump right into this. Okay, this is how I'm going to do it. Now I'm remembering. Okay. So this is a guy who is he's a film documentary maker who went up into the hills, interested in the sort of hillbilly music, the what we call old time fiddling. Found a guy named Lost John way up in the Kentucky hills. He said he went so far up.
When I asked him,
he went up so far that it became sort of totally an impoverished situation. His description of the old time fiddling is really something quite awesome. So listen to this one.
What made Lost John so great? He said, Lost John plays the fiddle with a bit of raw, a bit of how hard life is, a bit of like you got to get down to the roots of it, he said. At the same time, it's like a morning spring where the fog is lifting and the fiddle is just playing. At the same time, raw and gentle and beautiful. That's why I call this the greatest fiddler I ever heard. Bascom taught me how to listen, and I did.
You don't play them, John.
I know. She ought to get to playing more than she does.
Yeah. First twinkle, twinkle, little star.
So there you have some of the true mountain fiddling. And it's that raw quality he's talking about. These are people who are playing for sheer joy out on their back porches all over. And if you go to any of the bluegrass or folk festivals these days, people jam, they jam and they jam, and they are having the time of their lives. But here's what is so one of the things about this is that the raw thing comes from the way you touch the string, right? It's a less sophisticated, but somehow something that really cuts into you, you know? And the bend is a big thing in this kind of music. So he starts off, that bend right there, you find it all over the place in this American Appalachian style fiddling, right? You got that bend and you got that little bit of that raw sound going on. And then you add to that a little bit of a backbeat. The backbeat is one of the most important things in here, and it's a kind of a mystery where it came from, because a lot of the tunes that came into Appalachia were coming over from Ireland, Scotland, and they absolutely have no backbeat in that music. But somehow when it got into the hills of Kentucky, this backbeat came in, and you'll hear all through bluegrass When you get the fast bluegrass bands, you get this crazy backbeat going on. Now, I don't know if that happened to bleed over from African American culture. I'm not sure. It seems to be an American phenomenon, the really intense backbeat. So I'll give you another tune now. One of my all-time favorite fiddlers, John Hartford. My older brother, who's here watching tonight, was the one who first got this album, Aeroplane, steam-powered Aeroplane. John Hartford is one of these guys who sort of took it from the back porch out onto the stage. He wanted to be a Mississippi boatman, but he said music got in the way, so he ended up being this really great old-time player of banjo. He's singing. He writes amazing songs. He's won Grammys for his songs. Anyway, let me just give you a little fiddle tune by John Hartford in the same style of the old-timey style. Squirrel Hunters, John Hartford.
This is Squirrel Hunters.
Good stuff, good stuff. So, again, that sort of high whine from the fiddle, it's a very different sound. If you were to play it with classical music, you'd be using vibrato, you'd be using beauty of tone. None of those things are present. What you're shooting for is the high, lonesome sound. So Bill Monroe, the bluegrass, the famous Bill Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys, the mandolin player and singer, people always refer to him as having that high, lonesome sound. Well, it's kind of the same with the fiddle. Now, as a classical player, having to learn this music, I have to remove a lot of the sophistication of the technique I've been taught and get down to some like just simple stuff. No wild vibrato, just get into the string, let it be sort of downward and strong. Don't worry so much about the intonation and perfection of intonation. That's the old-timey thing. You go in for the spirit of it. You just have a ball. You get into sort of the repetitive sense of it, and it's just, if it gets you, and I say this about any of this music, if this stuff gets to you, we'll send you an email after, and I'll give you the links, and you can sort of follow some of it. Anything that really speaks to you. That's sort of how I always got into this music. Listen to one tune, you love it, and pretty soon you find yourself listening to more, and then the next thing you know, it's under your skin. Now I'm going to show you what happens if you speed that up, add a bit more technique, keep your backbeat going, but get the technique really fast and then improvise. Now you're talking bluegrass. So we're going to jump to one of the greatest bluegrass fiddlers who ever lived, Mark O'Connor. He's still around, going strong. You know, one of these winners of all of the fiddle contests when he was a kid, and his abilities are truly amazing. I heard him do a 3-hour solo show, had an audience mesmerized for 3 hours with just the fiddle alone. Here he is playing with Tony Rice, the great flat pickin' singer who's in the Bluegrass Hall of Fame, and Bela Fleck, the banjo player who sort of jazzed it up. So let's just get introduced to this, a little bit of bluegrass now. Mark O'Connor. Sorry about this. We may have to deal with a few of these. Oh shoot, I can't get rid of this because of people's, there it is. Sorry. All right, here we go.
Some 20-odd years ago, I ran away for the first time.
right, what happens at this point is they all take breaks, and the break in bluegrass is when you improvise, you take off, you let it all out there. And Mark O'Connor has a solo in here that just blew me away. I became obsessed with it for the last couple of weeks. I've been like slavishly learning this thing and slowing down the YouTubes to find it. So let me give you Mark O'Connor taking his break on this tune, Freeborn Man. It's a great one. Check out the ideas he's coming up with here. So right there, you see that smile? You know what that smile means? He's like, you know what? See if you can match that. He's ripping it up. And I can tell you, nobody matched it. It's like the amount of ideas flying off that guy. Since I've been trying to learn this thing, I've discovered that this guy can come up with ideas faster than I could possibly think of. Let me show you how I go about learning something like this. So I take the tune and I go over to the settings in YouTube, and then I put it at a slower speed. So I put it down to half speed, and now I can hear what he's doing. So just that opening thing he does there, right? So he's giving those extra notes in there. It could be no. Right? Got those bends going on in there. So when it's down at that speed, I can manage to hear the notes, figure out what the next few notes are. And I have to say, I have to give a shout out for technology right here, because when I was a kid learning this stuff, I would have to take that at full speed, playing on a vinyl record, no less, where you had to lift. Anyway, this allows you to just learn it slow and careful. And there's so many things to find out there. It's in bliss for learning these tunes, because of course you learn them all by ear. There's no music, nobody wrote down what he played there, right? So let's just check a little bit of it again, because it's just so amazing at the speed. Here we go, a little bit more of Mark playing that solo. Oops, go ahead. You know, there's a good lick for you. That's a real... You know, that's a good bluegrass lick right there. Straight up. All right, you know what? I think it's time to move on and show you something, because he's not my favorite bluegrass fiddler, despite my awe of him as like the Charlie Parker of great ideas. But the one who I really love is Vassar Clemens. Vassar's my man. I have loved Vassar Clemens since way back in the day. What this is Mark O'Connor put together an album playing with his heroes, and one of his heroes was Vassar. Vassar used to play with Bill Monroe back in the day. So Mark O'Connor chooses all of the fiddlers he loved, a bunch of Texas swing fiddlers. He's got, who does he have? Stephen Grappelli he plays, and he's playing with all of his heroes. He gets to, and he manages to sound like all of them. I can't believe it, but he gets to Vassar. So House of the Rising Sun, a slow tune. When Vassar comes in, I want you to check out what happens to the sound, because Mark O'Connor gets his licks, but he doesn't get that deep spiritual sound. So check this one out. Now Vassar comes in. Anyway, you got to admit, that's something amazing right there. Because the subtlety level of what Vassar's doing, I mean, Mark O'Connor's getting all those licks, but man, Vassar lays into it and it's got something, it's just little nuances, little vibrato at the end of something. And that sound, oh my God, that is a beautiful sound. So I'm going to show you one more thing of Vassar's that I really love. He did a solo album at one point. And what I love about Vassar is he somehow captures the old-timey feeling with all of this more sort of slightly jazzy, like he throws in a lot of extremely complicated licks, but keeps it feeling like old time. So he took the hokiest tune that I've ever known, Turkey in the Straw. They made us dance the Virginia Reel to it in school. We all thought it was hokey. He takes that tune and turns it into gold. I love listening to him play this tune. It's just Vassar Clemens and a banjo player laying out Turkey in the Straw, and man, it's the best. Anyway, you get the feeling, man. He's playing freely around with that tune in a way. So he takes the the hokey part, that little business there, right? That's one of the licks that feels hokey, right? He changes it into So I can't do it the way he does it, of course. I really shouldn't have even tried that, but he ends up taking the second half and just sort of just taking off on it and moving around and jumping and diving. And I'll tell you, man, that guy's a genius. He is a genius. Well, he's not with us anymore. He was a genius. Anyway, that's Vassar Clemens, and we're going to go out today. I'm going to leave you with Michael Cleveland. Michael Cleveland is another fiddler who came along and sort of blew everyone out of water. If Mark O'Connor's got these brilliant ideas and Vassar's got this subtlety and the soul, what Michael Cleveland has is just sheer speed of technique. So we're going to hear the Lee Highway Blues with Michael Cleveland laying it down. Sorry, let me find it here. Where are you? Here we go. Just check out some of these licks he lays out.
Thank you, that's the only lick I know.
And he's funny to boot. All right, now he's going to take off. Get ready. Hold on to your seats. go. Michael Cleveland taking it out for us. All right, it's time to change. It's time to change the scene a little bit. So, the next place I want to go is to Ireland. Going to move to Ireland. So again, a tradition of incredible fiddle playing comes out of Ireland. In the 1960s, there was sort of a revival, and a bunch of bands came out. The Chieftains came out of that, the Dan and Bothy Band, one of my all-time favorite bands, and a bunch of fiddlers. So I'm going to jump right into Kevin Burke. When I was in college, I was living in New York playing on the streets to make money, and Kevin Burke came into town and I saw him and I was entranced. I mean, I was kind of blown away, staggered, I would say. So I went out to the street and played on the streets till I had the money to buy If the Cat Fits, this album of his, and it's been one of my favorite albums ever since. I've learned a load of tunes off it. And here's Paddy Fahey's Jig with Kevin Burke playing on the fiddle. So what I'd like to talk about here, there is no backbeat. And of course the jig is in a fast 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, or they write it in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You feel the on beats, boom, boom. A lot of times they just pound their leg up and down while they're playing. But where you get the off rhythms is in the ornamentations of the fingers. That little turn right there puts a spark against the beat. And deep built into the jig is a sense of lilt. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you do not go. What you do is. So there's this bugada, digada, 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 digada feeling somewhere in there. Sometimes more pronounced, sometimes less pronounced. The Scottish players tend to pronounce it heavily, the Irish a little more subtly, but then you add these crackling ornaments that sort of are, to me, they're like the twinkle in the eye of an Irishman when he says something funny and keeps a straight face, you know. That little... And sometimes you do it with the bow. So, Paddy Fahey's Jig and Kevin Burke, who I fell in love with back in the day, fell in love with his fiddling. And now I want to move to someone named Martin Hayes. We're going to hear another version of Paddy Fahey's and show you just how different things can be. The fiddlers had gotten faster and faster and faster with their reels and jigs over time. You had, Dedanin with Frankie Gavin, you had Sean Keane playing with the Chieftains, and then along comes Martin Hayes and he just steps it all back, makes it more sensual. So listen to this version of Paddy Fahey's Jig played by Martin Hayes. So what we have here is those crackling turns are being replaced with a sort of a slow pull upward. Cazzo really likes the cut. That's just one finger hitting the string, as opposed to the turn, where you do this one and then you lift off. He does the cut, another cut. He still do a little bit with the bow, but his whole style, really beautiful, really sensitive. Very different than the Kevin Burke style, but... Oh, somebody barked. Whoever has the barking dog, maybe you could thank you. All right. Cool. I mean, with folk music, actually a barking dog is kind of a plus now that I really think about it. Awesome. So I wanted to move to my third favorite fiddler. I can never figure out who's my favorite fiddler. This is Tommy Peoples. Tommy Peoples, who made it big with the Bothy Band in 1975. In fact, the album was called 1975. They broke onto the Celtic scene almost like the Beatles did. They electrified everything. This is a reel. We're switching from jigs to reels now. This is a reel called Martin Winds. And listen to the style of ornamentation. To me, Tommy Peoples' ornamentation is like hearing the cliffs of Donegal from where he comes, dropping into the sea in this kind of just amazing way. Oops. Wait a minute. That's not the one I wanted. My bad. That's Kevin Burke playing live. I wanted Martin Winds. Here we go. Tommy Peoples.
3 miles today for adventure.
Oh yeah, here, wait, now here when the whole band comes in, the uilleann pipes and the flute. Suddenly, like a symphony orchestra coming in there. So the fiddle, the thing about Tommy Peoples is he manages to control a certain scratchy quality. I don't even know how he does it. So I spent a lot of time. That tune, man, I learned more from that tune. So he's getting this crackling thing. Some of it's from this bow. He uses very little bow, where you'll see somebody like Kevin Burke's using a lot of bow. Anyway, that style, it cuts like a knife, man. It's just, gets to your soul. Okay, what I'm going to show you next is Kevin Burke playing the same tune. And notice he's going to be using lots more bow, and it's a smoother, different style. I mean, beautiful, but different. And there's the hands of Matt Malloy. Matt Malloy, the great flute player who was in both the Chieftains and the Bothy Band. So Kevin Burke took over for Tommy Peoples when Tommy Peoples left the Bothy Band. So there were two kind of versions of the band, fiddle-wise. Matt Malloy, I'm on my honeymoon and we're in Westport, County Mayo. We drive past and I see a pub and it's called Matt Malloy's Pub. And I'm like, I know Matt Malloy. He's a flute player, played in the Bothy Band. And I said, there must be 1,000 Matt Malloys. And they probably, half of them own pubs here in Ireland. We went up and it was Matt Malloy, the flute player's pub. He bought a pub. And that night there was a huge concert going on. So Sharon and I went in and had just an amazing experience in there. He was just playing with all of his best buddies from that area of Ireland. Anyway, yeah. Okay, I'm going to give you one quick thing, because fiddle and pipes is a really amazing combination, and one which I think is just about as traditional as you get here. So let's hit Tommy Peoples doing The Wind That Shakes the Barley with Liam O'Flynn, the Uilleann Piper. See that small amount of bow he's using? Totally different than the Kevin Burke thing, right? Something about that sound with the Uilleanns, with that low note, and then oh God, brings me back to a different lifetime. You know, I sometimes feel like it brings me to another lifetime. Now I feel a little badly at this point in my talk, because I've only had men playing this music, and that is really not the case at all. So we're going to go out with a jig and a reel on this section with Liz Carroll, the great fiddler from Chicago, around at the same time as these guys. And also a quick shout out to a bunch of the young fiddlers. If you ever want to find some great fiddlers, just put in All Ireland, fiddle champion, and you're going to get like Hayley Richardson and Darragh Curtin and a bunch of amazing fiddlers who I would like to share with you. But for now, I will give you Liz Carroll playing first a little jig and then a little reel. The pure drop here. She's got that poke with the bow and the lift of the shoulder. She's an awesome fiddler. Right there, that's the moment. The moment when that guy behind her smiles. That, to me, that's it. You want to get a smile from one of your fellow musicians. That means that you're hitting it. So that's the jig. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now we go to the reel, which is always in 4, right? And we'll give you, this is so infectious, I just had to throw this in addition. So Liz Carroll, again, hitting the Tuttle's reel with John Doyle on guitar. And if this isn't infectious, I don't know what is. That moment when she hits that long note and then she gives a whoop. If you give a whoop for yourself when you're playing, you know you're on fire, right? Anyway, I think we're gonna have to leave. We're gonna have to leave Liz Carroll behind. She's now my favorite Irish fiddler after hearing those two tunes. That's the way it always goes, you know. Either your favorite is always the one you're listening to. There's so many great. Okay, we're gonna totally change. We're gonna move to another area here altogether. We're going to Greece now, to the Aegean. And I'm going to give you, Taksim. Taksim. Taksim is the solo you play, the free, open, improvised solo you play to set the mood for a tune. I think the tune he's doing is Kavandoritikos, and it says Greek Nisiotiko, which will be where it's from. They always sort of name the style after the exact region in Greece where it is. So Theologos Michaelis playing some Taksim. Oh! Wait, something happened there. Sorry, I lost it. My bad. I jumped one. There we go. Taksim. Aman, aman. All right, he breaks into the tune. So the taksim, let's think about some of the things that identify the way the Greeks play. The bow, first of all, is floating in a certain way rather than getting a direct sound. He's getting, there's all this air, all these extra mystical overtones floating. So there's that crazy use of the bow, getting all those amazing overtones. Then there's the makams, the scales. Now in Turkey, the makams are very specific, and in Greece, they're a little looser, they're folkier. But the makams are scales that have notes which we would consider to be out of tune. They're not out of tune. According to their method, our stuff is out of tune. But I'll just show you that what he's playing in is ushak. That's our Western way of thinking of it. Here's their way of thinking of it. That note is now halfway between being a B flat and a B natural. This C is a little sharp. Then there's the thing which they do, which Sofia Belides, the first person who taught me to play Greek folk music when I was in graduate school, she always called it a doit, and it's where you move your finger. Doit, 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 doit. Then there's some crazy sliding stuff. So you got the makams, the notes that are a little in between. You got that bow, that airy bow. You've got the doits going on, those sort of. Then you got these crazy bends. You put it all together, and you get these amazing taksim, like this guy Theologos is playing. All right, now I want to jump into the actual dance tunes. Let's take the sirto. The sirto is the island tune that the fiddle is the king of. When you get to the islands of Greece, that's where the fiddles are supreme. So let's hit something called Aeroplano. It's basically the leaving on a jet plane of Greece. This is kind of a fun video that they made of it, but the sound, again, hear that slightly out of tune sound that gives it the flavor. I shouldn't say it's out of tune because of course they don't think it is, but you know what I mean. Listen to this one. This is a fun one. Aeroplano, Sirto. Sorry about this. Here we go. Sirto.
Εγώ φεύγω και σ' αφήνω μια για πάντα βρε. για παιχνίδια γαμώ. Στην καπνό φουμάρω και για σένα πώς μπορώ αεροπλάνο να πάρω να έρθω πάλι να σε βρω.
All right, so listen to the, again, that sort of sharp. So the sirto is this very open and joyful sort of dance that they do in the islands. So it always has the beat. It's all right, I'd love to give you another sirto, but I think we should move on. So there was a crazy occurrence that happened in Greece in 1923, which is that the Turkish were starting to do a pogrom against Greek people living in their country. So then Greece and Turkey came to an agreement, and they sent 1.5 million Greeks off of the coast of Asia Minor, what is now Turkey, back to Athens, and vice versa. They sent the Muslims back to Turkey. So they sort of separated them ethnically. What happened at that point in Athens was very similar to what happened in New York back in the day in the 1950s with jazz, which is that all these musicians with different styles mixed in. So here we're going to hear a Karsalama, Dimitrula. It's a mixed meter, 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 3. Right? Instead of being in 9 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3, you've got 2 2 2 and 3. And it was one of the rhythms that came over from Istanbul into Athens, and the Rebettica tradition picked it up, and just an amazing amount of great music. So this one's very joyful. The Karsalama, Dimitrula. Θα σου φέρω λατέρνα, να κάνει κέφι και κέρνα. Dimitrula mu. Anyway, it's great music, unbelievable, right? Okay, we don't have a lot of time left for this Greek segment, so I'm going to move to an Ikariotika, which is where the fiddle sort of leads out, and just show you how the dancers tend to jump into things. Because the fiddle and the dance is extremely connected in Greece. The dances from every corner of Greece. There's a guy from Boston, Joe Graziosi. I know he has an Italian last name, but he's Greek, and he's a master of knowing all the dances. He knows every step on which side of which island. They do a little different on every dance, and they have a dance from every corner. So the one we'll hear now is the Ikariotika. The fiddle leads this out with a sort of long improvisatory playing that's really awesome. Let me find, where's my Ikariotiko? All right. and you see how the lead dancer is always the one gets all this attention and everyone's shouting and they're loving it. And you got this lauto playing the basic rhythm, and then the fiddle, this ikariotica is just a series of open licks that you keep playing. Anyway, you get this hypnotic thing going, and then everyone just dances and they sort of get into a trance, and it's really, really joyful stuff. This shows you what it's like to play at a wedding or something. Let's see how we're doing time-wise. I think I'm going to try to fit in a quick shiftatelli. This is the Greek music that comes also from the coast of Turkey, Asia Minor, which this tune Sala Sala. So the shiftatelli is one of the ones you dance it in couples or by yourself. It's a sexier style dance. And it's the one which throughout the Middle East everybody loves to dance to these days. Just really, the shiftatelli is sort of the dance of the Middle East, as you will hear. There you have it. The shift. That's a fairly slow. That's a slow shiftatelli going on right there, but it's in a very strange mode called Sabah. You got that? And you can tell that. That's definitely the dance of the Middle East, right? That sort of shimmying around kind of thing. Ah, man, it's beautiful. There's many different types of shiftatellis which we could get into, but you know what? We don't have time. On we go. I'm going to end now with a little story about Crete, the island of Crete. So there were political differences between Crete and Athens. The city of Hania was very opposed to things that were happening in Athens, and they were political with their songs on the radio. So the government actually passed legislation saying no violin playing from Crete can be heard on the radio. For some reason, they picked the violin as the instrument of evil, right? So what people did in Crete is they said, okay, well then we'll play the lira, which is a little three-stringed instrument you play almost like a cello, but it's in the violin register. And it turns out now all of this great dance music from Crete, the fiddling is done on the lira. So we're going to end with a dance from Crete called Malavisiotica, and with a bunch of dancers who are now in costume, which is something they love to do at their celebrations, is get a professional dance troupe to come out in costume and do some really awesome dancing. So let's check out Malavisiotica from Crete. Just a second, let me find it. As soon as this ad is done. All right.
jest Kekuzulusa Bronus.
So right there, now the bagpipe has taken over. The zambuna, this right here, is the Cretan bagpipe. They have another one in the north, in Macedonia, called the gaida, which is a very Bulgarian kind of bagpipe. So bagpipe is also part of this whole tradition. But anyway, so that Cretan, I can do a malaviziotica, but not as well as that particular lyra player. So I'm going to leave it there for the Greek music. So this gives you a sense of how the dance works, how the song works. The fiddle is sort of in the middle of it all. The clarinet is also huge, but I sort of stayed away from that. That's more on the mainland. There's some great tradition of clarinet playing all through the mainland of Greece. But on the islands, it's all about the violi, the fiddle. All right, and we're going to leave that now and go to a whole nother place. Well, we're not going to go that far away. We're going to move up north. The Jewish people, of course, did not have a homeland for a long time, and they had spread out throughout Russia, throughout Poland, Germany, Moldavia, all the way down, Bulgaria, Hungary, Romania. And the Jews found their own music, and they picked and chose little bits and pieces from all around them, and yet they completely came up with their own core of dances and music. So we are going to now listen to some Ashkenaz music. They sing in Yiddish. Down in the south, there's a different type of Jewish language called Ladino, but we're not going to go into that. That's the Sephardim, which actually my middle name is a Sephardic Jewish name, so I probably ought to be playing that music instead, but I ended up at one point touring with the Klezmatics, and so I learned the Ashkenaz music. We're going to start with a fiddler named Michael Levy. I chose this partly because he has a nice nigun style that he plays, but also all these images of these great Jewish fiddlers is just some of the paintings, and I love this. All those images, those beautiful images of fiddlers, it's like the Chagall paintings. In fact, I think there's a Chagall that comes up just in a second. The Chagall fiddlers, I love these guys. Here he is. Chagall painting these fiddlers all flying through the sky and larger than the buildings, and it's like somehow the fiddle was at the core of this life, and you can feel in the nigun, which you were just hearing, the sort of sad, the mournful quality of a people who've been through extreme suffering, and it's made its way into the way they ornament their music. This thing called the creks is to cry. There's always this sort of shrug in there. And then there's this sort of trill that acts as instead of vibrato, you've got this sort of sad trill going. So what I'd like to give you next is Joseph Zolinsky. We're going to go back to the teens and the 20s when recordings first came out from all over. Any of this music we've been listening to was recorded extensively from all over the world, every corner of the world, people ran out with recording devices and captured what are now kind of the source material for a lot of this. So here's Joseph Solinsky playing with a cymbal. The cymbal is similar to what you heard that the woman playing in the Karsilama, it's called the santur in Greece, but the cymbal further north is a much more, a larger version of the hammered dulcimer. And it's played in this beautiful way. So Joseph Solinsky, we're going to hear him playing Romanian Fantasy, a husadal, again kind of slow and soulful, but just listen to this old world sound. It's really quite striking and amazing. So it brings you back to the old world, doesn't it? That sound, the crackling 78 and the beautiful fiddling. So that, again, you've got the... Romanian Fantasy, and you hear that cymbal, just sort of keeping this flowing thing in the background. It's beautiful. It takes a little while to get used to those old recordings. You have to sort of listen past all the snaps and pops of the 78, and when you listen into it, you're hearing some great musicians. So I wanted to show you what Alicia Svigals, she's now considered one of the greatest exponents of Yiddish violin playing in the world and has been for a long time. She's a friend of mine from when I was 12 years old at music camp. We've been basically soulmates ever since. She played Greek folk music for a while and she subbed for me in my band. So then when time came, I subbed for her in the Klezmatics, toured with them, and she taught me the style. Here's her version of Romanian Fantasy based on the old Joseph Solinsky as played by the Klezmatics, her band from New York City. Anyway, would glad to listen on, but I'm afraid we have to get on to the finish of this soon. Our hour is pretty much up here, but Alicia, yeah, what a player. She somehow synthesized a modern sound. You can tell the recording is very modern there, but she's got the same things that... One thing I was going to mention is there's a downward slide. Now, most of these traditions, like the Irish one had an upward slide and the bluegrass has an upward slide. What you have here is a downward slide of sorts. So part of the soul of the music is not only comes from the cracks, but it's that downward slide. Anyway, beautiful music, beautiful music. Romanian Fantasy by Joseph Zielinski and then by Alicia Sfigos. And speaking of Alicia, I'll give you something more fun. We've been going in for the soulful end and the somewhat sad end of the spectrum, the sort of doleful, looking at the suffering of life a little, but we're going to go into the joyful now, because when the Jewish people dance, the hora, there's nothing more fun than that in this world. So let's have a look at Alicia. She's going to do a little doina, little improvisation, and then the Frelax. Frelax. So you can see there, that building, it looks like they're out in Central Park or somewhere, and she calls her band Fiddle Express. Anyway, so that's the Frelax they're dancing, or you'd call it the hora. If you're at a wedding, people say, let's dance the hora. The hora, there's a version of the hora that's much older, that's in 3, that's called the Romanian hora. Nowadays, the modern hora is the Frelax, and Frelax means in Yiddish happy. So it's the happy dance. This is when you're happy, this is what you dance. And what's interesting is it's a 2-beat, which means the basic beat is 1, 2, 1, 2. But what you've got against that is something called the Bulgar beat. So it can be referred to as a Bulgar also, and that is and you'll hear that coming from the drums going against what the bass is doing, and you have a 2-beat with a cross rhythm on it, and that's where it really gets fun. That's what makes the sort of that you really want to dance to this, is you've got this amazing internal thing of the 2-beat, but in the middle of it. You've got that 2-beat, you've got that Bulgar, and then you've got a crazy melody on top. Anyway, the Frelax, the happy dance. So the next thing I want to do is just quickly hit on the Klezmer Conservatory Band, and then on Itzhak Perlman and his effect on klezmer music. So, the Klezmer Conservatory Band was begun by Hankus Netsky from the New England Conservatory, and in the 1960s he was largely responsible for a huge new insurgence of energy and interest and people wanting to play klezmer music, getting into it. He unearthed source tapes and he put together a band of students, many of whom have gone into the world and started bands, including the Klezmatics. Frank London was part of that band. Any number of them. Don Byron, we'll hear him in a minute. But there's this really great clip I found that I just delight in. It's a wedding, and it shows you how the music is so integral to the idea that you're now celebrating. And the guy who just got married, who's this older gentleman, picks up a violin, and the klezmer band kind of comes along with him. And I don't know, just to show just how folk music is such a thing of immediacy when there's music comes the minute the spirit moves, So let's just have a quick look at this one. This one is very fun.
Fiddle, please. From Philip, everyone to be quiet, please.
I just love how that guy joins in singing there. It's great, you know. And so he's just gotten married. First he's got everyone singing and clapping, and the next thing you know, he's got a fiddle in his hand. And the band, the Klezmer Conservatory Band, is sort of helping him out, and it's like, it's the first impulse, you know. I'm married, I got to play the fiddle. I love it. It's just a wonderful clip. I'll now give you just a quick hit of another Freilachs being played by the Klezmer Conservatory Band, just because we didn't get to hear them, and they were one of the moving forces in klezmer music. Hanka Snetsky on the accordion. So we'll do that, and then we'll finish off with Itzhak. So here we go. Freilachs again, the happy dance. And yes, indeed, that's Don Byron playing the clarinet. He went on to have quite a big career playing all kinds of stuff, including lots of klezmer. Right behind him, Dave Harris, who's formed many a great band, and his wife, Mimi Rabson, who was in this band, the klezmer band, the Klezmer Conservatory Band, and one of the great fiddlers. I couldn't find a good clip of her live because I really wanted to play Mimi, but we'll have to leave her out for now. We're going to move over now to the final clip of the evening, which is Itzhak Perlman being shown how to play a tune by Brave Old World. Brave Old World is one of the great klezmer bands. I really love these guys. I think Alan Byrne, the accordionist, makes the accordion sound more Yiddish than anybody I've ever heard. Michael Alpert, the singer, is just totally infectious and amazing. And you can tell that Itzhak Perlman is pretty much having the time of his life doing this. It's just such a great clip. So they run through a couple of different types of tunes. They hit the Freilachs for a minute. They go into a Romanian hora, and he takes a doina. Itzhak takes he does some improvisation, and this is just the way we're going to finish off the evening today, is with Itzhak Perlman, the great classical player, learning to play his own Yiddish music.
We'll sing the first verse. We've done nice.
Oops. Sorry.
Go ahead, just sing the first verse. That was the first verse. This is the second. Now, teetle, 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 teetle.
Oi, teetle, 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 teetle. Oi, spiel der Pass
Hey, Michael. Now the Romanian Hora and Itzhak Doina. Oh, got his face at a bad moment. There, get the smile. Itzhak's smiling. He's having a ball. He's having a ball. All right, that's basically it. That's the show for tonight, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. We sort of yes, go ahead, Tracy.
At this point, I'd like to ask everybody if you want to show your video. You don't have to, but you can at this point. And if you have questions for Rohan, please raise your hand. But I'm going to start with a question that somebody asked earlier. Rohan, let me see if I
Okay,
can find
may I just say, if you've had enough at this point and you need to leave, there's nothing will be held against you. That's absolutely fine.
Yes, we've always had a hard time getting Rohan off the stage.
Too true.
So there's a question for you. Do folk fiddlers gravitate to the same instruments as classical violinists?
I'm not sure exactly what that means, but what I would say is in the folk tradition, oftentimes people play more than one instrument as a natural course. Like in bluegrass, you often learn mandolin if you learn fiddle, and so there's a funny doubling up of instruments. You often sing a lot as well. So in most folk traditions you kind of do a bunch of things, but in any specific tradition there are only a certain number of instruments you can really study. So, for instance, the oboe is not a particularly folk instrument, so you can't gravitate to that. Really, you'll gravitate to the clarinet because that's a very folk instrument. If you're, so I would say that personality-wise, people have personalities for certain instruments. So in that sense, you gravitate to your instrument. But the instruments that are used in folk music tend to be quite different than those used in classical music. So.
Great. The next question is most fiddle music played almost exclusively in first position?
No, not at all. It actually depends on the tradition. The Irish fiddlers do tend to stay in first position. Let's think here. The Greek players go up. In India, they cover as much as any classical musician. Mark O'Connor is able to play. I heard him do crazy stuff up in higher positions. In fact, Mark O'Connor used to do a thing where he'd go up in a higher position and then stay there and move around in that position. And after a show, I asked him, I said, that looks like the way guitarists think on the instrument. And he goes, oh, that was my first instrument. So it depends on the tradition, really. I would say some of them are more in first position, and it also depends on the player whether they have the capability of doing anything else.
Okay. Does anybody want to ask a live question? Just raise your hand. I don't see any hands up. Are there any hands up? No hands up.
Catherine.
Catherine. All right, Catherine.
Hey, Rohan, how do you pull all that stuff together and how do you keep it all cataloged? It was amazing. I'll go offline.
I'll tell you, the thing about it is it's a lot like learning another language. I had to spend years on any one tradition to start to feel like I could express myself properly in that tradition. So, the bluegrass thing I started when I was 13, and then in college I began doing the Irish fiddling a bit, and so with any one of them, it doesn't happen instantaneously, and it's a lot like if you change languages, you have to change the whole structure of how you think, and the sounds you're going to make. So I've had to train my fingers to move from one tradition to the other quickly without having them bleed in. So when I play klezmer, I might end up playing some Greekisms in there accidentally. So, but over the years, it gets simpler. You know, you just keep at it.
All right. I think Susan Gutterman, do you have your hand up?
Yes, I do. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Rohan, the first installment with the American folk, the old guys up in Kentucky, if they had a backbeat, is it possible that it came from Africa and they got it from slaves?
There's a PhD thesis waiting to be made on that. It is possible. I've often thought that was possible because that backbeat basically came through the early Delta blues players and the gospel church and even the singing out in the fields, and eventually worked its way into like Chicago blues and then worked its way into rock and roll, and it became a central feature of R&B and funk and a lot of the music that has been our American backbone rock and roll has that backbeat very prominently. So it's possible that's where it came from, but I have no idea how the mountain fiddlers would have picked it up from that. So it's actually a mystery, I have to say. If you find out the answer, let me know.
Anybody else? You can use the raise your hand feature too. I think Susan Dawes has a question, and then Victor is next.
Victor. Oh,
Susan,
you're muted.
You're muted. You need to unmute, Susan.
Where did she go?
She's right here. She has to unmute, though.
Hello?
She's waiting to unmute. Can you unmute yourself, Susan? Okay.
Shall we wait? Shall we have Victor ask his question while she's unmuting?
Yeah, let's go to Victor first, and then we'll come back to Susan.
Hey, Victor.
You need to unmute.
How are you?
There you go.
Thank you, Rohan. That was great. I just want to tell you that, there was a lot of resources for bluegrass and old-timey music. I've been playing bluegrass and old-time for 50 years.
Nice.
National bands. So I want to tell you that, first of all, there's on WICN on Tuesday nights from 7 to 10, Tom Banyai does a bluegrass show. He's been doing it for 30 years.
Nice.
Also, too, I run a bluegrass jam at Union Music where I teach.
Mm-hmm.
We're not doing it now, but when the pandemic gets better, so anybody who's a musician can do that. And there's something called Fiddle Hell that Dave Reiner does in Westford at the Regency. And people like Kevin Burke will be there, Jay Unger and so forth, all kinds of fiddle music. And that will be going on virtually in April. So it's Dave Reiner. It's called Fiddle Hell. Every possible fiddle style
is
going to be available there. So thank you, Rohan.
Great.
Thanks, Victor.
Thanks,
Fiddle
Victor.
Hell.
Susan, I think Susan Dawes has a question.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes. We can.
Oh, okay. So I texted this, but I thought I would just ask it live. It seems to me that with the different geographic fiddling sounds, there is sort of a reminiscent of the actual linguistic sounds of a country.
Mm-hmm.
And has there been any research done connecting music with actual language and the brain structures that form with language development?
I don't know. The most famous example is that Bartók noticed a certain kind of thing that in the Hungarian folk music, which is exactly the way by going yada, like having a strong and then a weak yada, which tends to be how people speak, and that was throughout the music. So then he began to use it. So that aspect, I've definitely know people have looked into that and noticed it and made much of it. I don't know, as far as other countries, I think you're absolutely right. I think that the sound of the language and the sound of the way people are doing things, it's also maybe not just language, but it's also somehow a sort of condition of spirit, if you will. Like I was saying about the Irish, the twinkle in the eye, and then the sort of twinkle in the music. That there's I don't know if it's always related exactly to language, but certainly some spiritual essence is coming through that's very similar.
Cool. Thanks, Ro. We have one last question from Tony.
Hello.
Oh, hi. This is Tony here. Sorry, I've got a little technical challenge here, but we loved what you did, Rohan. Thank you so much for. We share this strange blend of traditional and old time music as well as classical. And I was just curious on the American side of things. Yeah. I'm also interested in Cape Breton fiddle and in some of the, you mentioned about the backbeat and the African influence. And Appalachian music really, I think, has a lot of African influence in it. And I was curious your thoughts on that.
Well, certainly they use the banjo, which they say came from Africa. So I think you're right about that. As far as the Cape Breton, which I think has more Scottish, maybe some Irish, but probably more Scottish influence, that came down through Quebec and did make its way into the contra dances of New England. So I grew up contra dancing, and I have to say the music we were dancing to was not at all Appalachian. It was most definitely more Celtic sounding and in fact probably Cape Breton sounding with the piano and the. So different parts of the state sort of absorbed different things that came over. But I think in Appalachia there was maybe Irish tunes, probably Old English tunes, mixing in with something, possibly some kind of African influence. I think that's possible, but I'm not a scholar of this, so I couldn't say for sure. But it's a very interesting question for sure.
Great,
well,
thank you
really
so much.
Loved what you played.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you everybody for coming. I will send out an email tomorrow which will have the links to all of the performances that Rohan has recommended and more. There were way too many links to share in the chat. So look for your email tomorrow. And thank you again for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Good to see you, everyone. Thanks, Rohan. Good night.
Bye. Night, Rohan.
Thank you. Woo.